Hello, I'm Andy Mack and welcome to Movie Shorts, the podcast where I don't just ask whether a film is good or bad, but why it works, who it's really for, and what it's trying to say beneath the surface. Mercy arrives with familiar ingredients, a recognisable star, a near-future setting, and a moral dilemma built around technology, justice, and power. On paper, it looks like a high-concept thriller asking timely questions about truth and accountability. What makes Mercy interesting, though, isn't just the ideas it raises, but the tension between what the film wants to explore and how accessible it makes that exploration. This is a story about judgment, responsibility, and systems that claim to be neutral, yet rarely are. So the question isn't whether Mercy is entertaining or topical, it's whether it meaningfully interrogates the world it points at or simply gestures towards it. So let's get straight to it. On the surface, Mercy looks like a near-future tech thriller. A man trapped in a system, racing against time, forced to prove his innocence while technology closes in around him. Chris Raven is an LAPD detective who finds himself on trial for the murder of his wife. It's a system he knows well and one he previously supported, with the case overseen not by a human judge but by an AI known as Maddox, designed to remove emotion and bias from justice altogether. The evidence appears overwhelming: blood on Chris's clothing, doorbell footage placing him at the house shortly before the murder, and a probability score that places his guilt at 97.5%. He has a limited window to reduce that figure below a critical threshold. If he fails, he will be executed on the spot. But Mercy isn't just interested in mystery or suspense in the traditional sense. It wants you to be actively involved, helping to solve the puzzle, racing the clock, and feeling the pressure as information is revealed. The countdown structure and first-person perspective are designed to pull you into that experience. Beneath that urgency, the film is far more interested in process than plot, in how systems make decisions, how responsibility is outsourced, and what happens when human judgment is replaced by something that claims to be neutral. The film is led by Chris Pratt, playing a man caught inside a justice mechanism that doesn't care about intention, context or morality, only outcomes. Directed by Timur Bekmambetov, Mercy runs at around 90 minutes, and it's lean by design, mirroring the literal countdown Raven faces during his trial. There's very little space for detours or backstory. Everything is geared towards pressure, escalation, and inevitability. If you're expecting a twist-heavy spectacle, this may feel stripped back. But if you're interested in films that uses genre to quietly question how power operates and who it ultimately protects, Mercy is playing a more restrained procedural game. At the centre of Mercy is Chris Pratt, delivering a deliberately restrained performance. This isn't a quip-led charismatic turn, and it isn't chasing easy sympathy. Pratt plays Chris Raven as someone who believed deeply in the system he now finds himself trapped inside. A man who is used to certainty, logic and process, and suddenly now stripped of all three. That history matters. Raven isn't just a victim of the system, he helped legitimize it. Pratt lets that irony sit quietly in the performance. There's no grand reckoning or detailed monologue. Instead, it surfaces in hesitation, frustration and disbelief as the rules he once trusted refuse to bend for him. Opposite him is Judge Maddox, played by Rebecca Ferguson, in a performance that is icy, steely and unsettlingly controlled. Maddox is presented as something close to human, calm, articulate, authoritative, with fleeting hints of emotion that suggest internal conflict beneath the surface. And this is where the film slightly overreaches for me. The idea that Maddox is actively fighting human emotion, complete with familiar flickers and glitches and resets, feels like a step too far. Ferguson does sell the authority and menace, but the visual shorthand for artificial consciousness is well worn, softening what could have been a more disturbing ambiguity. Still, the dynamic does work. Human urgency clashes against institutional calm. One side pleads for context and intention, the other deals only in outcomes. That contrast sharpens the film's tension and keeps the performances in quiet, uneasy conversation. And this is where Mercy either stands or wobbles, because they arrive carrying the weight of familiar cinematic influences. The film sits firmly in a lineage of stories about guilt before innocence, dystopian policing, and the dehumanizing promise of technology. There are clear echoes of Minority Report in the way guilt is treated as a statistical certainty rather than moral judgment. Like that film, Mercy asks what happens when prediction replaces proof, when justice becomes something you're required to disprove rather than something the system must earn. It's also a vision of futuristic law enforcement, also giving me a reminder of RoboCop, not tonally but thematically. Both films are suspicious of the systems that promise neutrality and efficiency while quietly eroding humanity. Technology becomes a shield, allowing responsibility to be hidden behind process, probability, and protocol. And formally, the film borrows from Phone Booth, using a confined space and a ticking clock to generate pressure. But crucially, that restriction does more than create suspense. Raven isn't just boxed in, he's literally tied to a chair. There are no escape routes, no physical agency, and no way to perform control. Like Phone Booth, the containment becomes exposure. Raven can't outrun consequences or rewrite the story. His flaws, certainty, arrogance, and blind faith in the system are laid bare, with nowhere to hide. What complicates all of this is the film's hesitation around its AI judge. By giving Maddox flickers of human emotion, the critique subtly shifts. The danger becomes malfunction rather than design, error rather than ideology. In doing so, the film softens what could have been a more unsettling accusation. That tension leaves Mercy in an uneasy but interesting place, clearly aware of its influences, strong in its questions, but still negotiating how far it's willing to push its answers. Mercy is designed with a very specific kind of control. The filmmaking is functional rather than expressive, and that feels intentional. The camera rarely draws attention to itself, the editing is clean and efficient, and scenes are designed to move information rather than emotion. That restraint mirrors the system at the centre of the story. There's a clinical quality to the visuals, glass screens, controlled lighting, reinforcing a world governed by process rather than empathy. Even moments of heightened tension are framed with order, as though chaos is being actively contained. The film's short time does work in its favour. At around 90 minutes, it keeps pressure high and avoids indulgence, echoing the countdown Raven is racing against. When he tries to widen the frame to investigate, chasing alternate explanations or solve the case the way he's used to, those routes are shut down almost immediately. Calls are cut short, leads dismissed, possibilities taken off the table. There's no space for subplots or release valves, which maintains focus but also limits texture. We're locked in the mechanisms of the system, just as the character is, and the film makes sure we feel that constraint. Where the craft falters slightly is in its visual shorthand for AI. The familiar flickers and resets are effective, but safe, and less unsettling than the premise deserves. Mercy is, first and foremost, an entertaining film. It moves quickly, sustains tension, and uses its premise well enough to keep you engaged. For much of its runtime, it balances ideas and urgency with confidence. Where it stumbles is right at the end. Not because the reasoning collapses, the logic still holds, but because the execution starts to verge on the silly side. The film reaches for heightened drama when restraint would have served it better. slightly undercutting the seriousness of the questions it's been asking. It's not the thinking that disappoints, it's how that thinking is staged. That doesn't undo what works. The ideas remain compelling, the performance is grounded, and the critique of systems and outsourced responsibility still lands. If anything, the frustration comes from the sense that Mercy was capable of ending on a more unsettling note than it ultimately chooses. Still, in a landscape dominated by bloated runtimes, this is a refreshing watch. When Mercy finds its way to Netflix, it'll make for a strong Friday night film, smart enough to spark conversation, accessible enough to enjoy in the moment. It may not fully stick the landing, but I actually think it's well worth the ride. Mercy, thoughtful, thrilling, but clumsy. Thank you for listening to Movie Shorts. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd really appreciate you recommending it to others or leaving a comment on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Those small things genuinely make a difference. You can also find me on Instagram and TikTok. Just search at Andy Mac Movie Shorts, where I post clips, updates and thoughts on upcoming episodes. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.